This was the same woman that birthed a vampire in front of me 10 years ago. How much money is enough money to give somebody to justify systemic abuse? The main focus of that film was her getting the D. So there's a new Diana film out with Kristen Stewart, and it's reminded me how complicated my feelings are about the royal family. So if you'll allow me, I want to hash those out right now and also think about why I care so much. So if you'd like to join me, we're going to get into that in a second. But if you haven't been here before and you would like to be here again, seeing this face and hearing these shoddy, messy thoughts, make sure you subscribe so we can see each other again. That would be nice. 2, I'm gonna give some spoilers in this, but they're not spoilers because obviously it's a semi-biopic. Both of the films that I'm gonna discuss today are, so most of the facts about Diana are already out, and also furthermore, I don't really think that it's a kind of spoilery versus non-spoilery kind of film. It's more of a thematic kind of film, and therefore the discussion will be quite thematic. So if you haven't seen the 2021 film yet, hopefully this video will interest you and not spoil the experience for you. And I also thought it would be interesting to discuss my feelings on the new film versus the most recent film made about Diana in this format, which was called Diana, and it was released in 2003. The difference between these films really interested me, and I think that there's a way in here for us to talk about how we feel about the royal family and also how the world has kind of progressed since the 2013 release. So we're going to be doing an old-fashioned face-off. Superficially, which one was better? We're going to find out today. There are going to be 3 heats. General portrayal of Diana, which, by the way, I know that it takes a team of people to create a character on screen, so it's not just going to be a critique of the actresses, but also just generally of the team who created the character that we see on screen. Then, narrative choices, of which both directors made many, to varying degrees of chaos. And thirdly, each film's relationship to truth. Not the depiction of truth, but the way they have chosen to interact with truth, I think is really, really interesting. So let's go. The first category. The portrayal of Diana. Now I've become, in recent years, somewhat of a Diana fact connoisseur. Why? I'm not sure. It might have something to do with what Sarah Marshall calls such expensive misery. The royal family really fascinate me. One, because I very vividly remember Princess Diana's death. She died when I was 7, being the first time that I ever saw my mum cry, and I think that was the moment where I started to work out the really weird relationship we have between the symbol of somebody, what the royal family was in essence, and also just this idea of being that sad about somebody that most people haven't met was really like confused my little 7-year-old brain, and I've been trying to sort it out ever since. But also I think it's interesting because the royal family are on paper the people who are supposed to be having the best time, both according to feudalism and its successor capitalism, but seem to be having a really bad time. Fascinating. Sad, but fascinating. And how we portray the royals, particularly Diana, I think gives a good gauge of how our society feels about proximity to luxury, entitlement, how much money is enough money to give somebody to justify systemic abuse. And if the royal family aren't happy, what does that say about our idea of happiness and what it takes to get there? All very interesting questions. And when we portray Diana, there is so much to do. Diana is somebody who was, as most humans are, an incredibly complex, detailed and specific person, but she also embodied something so universal and so, for want of another word, blank, that anybody could relate to her, anybody could mourn her death, anybody could look up to her and feel like they knew her. That's really, really hard to play. She also needs to be a woman who I would believe could work at a nursery and also at the same time push her stepmother, elderly stepmother, down the stairs. Not a disputed fact, she admitted it herself. So these are big shoes to fill. You can't just employ any random British blonde actress and hope that she does a good job. Case in point, Naomi Watts in Diana 2013. Oh my frickin' God. For most of the film, and maybe this is because I don't have a huge awareness of Naomi Watts' career, but for most of the film, I genuinely thought she was an American actress putting on a British accent. It was only halfway through, when I was bored enough to start looking at Wikipedia, that I realised she was British. She's just awful at accents. I also think that there's something interesting about the way people critique accents. So when we talk about Kristen Stewart's accent, I actually think she did a really solid, pretty stellar job. But when we critique it, I particularly have seen this from reviews that have already come out from reviewers in the US, they are comparing Kristen Stewart's accent to what they believe a British accent is. But the thing is, Princess Diana didn't have a normal British accent. She was part of this very specific, incredibly elitist and historically closed class of people that have a very specific RP, but it's more than RP, it's really weird. They have this accent. She ran in those circles. She lived very, very close to lots of royal properties growing up. She moved in those circles. She met Prince Charles before. Her grandparents worked for the royal family. Like, she was in there, and that accent is very specific, and if you listen to Kristen Stewart, she's actually doing it really bloody well. That's the first time I'm going to defend Kristen Stewart in this film, and there will be so many more. Another thing that I found, just there was some really superficial things about the portrayal of Diana in 2013. One, wig game, very embarrassing. I'm not a wig connoisseur, but geez, those were definitely wigs on their heads, right? But also the mannerisms that both of them adapted. So the thing with Naomi Watts is that obviously she was kind of just playing herself, and either she hadn't studied the tapes of Diana, or she was trying to do something creative with something that's incredibly recognisable to everybody. The only time she copied Diana's mannerisms was when she was actually mimicking a scene that Diana had actually done, so the one on TV. But in her other improvised scenes that aren't, there's no record of them, she couldn't copy them, she just kind of makes it up. Whereas Kristen Stewart's mannerisms are slightly scary. I think she completely disappeared into this role. I just completely forgot she was Kristen Stewart for most of the film, and trying to tell my brain this was the same woman that birthed a vampire in front of me 10 years ago was just really hard to communicate. So I think she did an incredible job, and I also think that what's interesting about casting Kristen Stewart is that she is also a woman who doesn't play up to the press and has been criticised for that. So while Diana learnt long-term how to work with the press, definitely, undeniably, she wasn't somebody who was using and playing to the press in the way the royal family would have preferred her to. And in the same way, Kristen Stewart is somebody who notoriously won't smile for the camera if she doesn't fancy it, which I respect, and admits that she's really uncomfortable in interviews. She really cares about her craft, and she explicitly hates the paparazzi and that side of the scrutiny that especially women receive when they're in the public eye. So casting her was a really interesting meta choice when we think about the audience's knowledge of Kristen Stewart as a person and what kind of source material she might draw on to look that hounded on screen. But I think when we look at the question of why people are so obsessed with Princess Diana, I think it's that she has a very unusual way of holding herself. She's incredibly embarrassed to be alive at all times, but also quite stubborn. She's I wouldn't do that, I'm not doing that. And the fact that Kristen Stewart was able to get that right on so many occasions, and also I think with this particular class of British people, they are so constrained. Not that they are trying to hold their emotions in, but they don't know what it is to let those emotions out. They've been beaten out of them at a young age, and then to be able to express a scene where Kristen completely explodes it was really incredible. Whereas Naomi Watts, she was kind of just reacting to people around her. Her emotions were like that. You didn't get this feeling that she had the kind of upbringing that Diana had, and there was nothing about her performance that was spontaneous. That is clear with Diana, even when she's taking part in interviews where she's planned them, she's turned up. There's something she is making it up as she goes along. Every question she doesn't just deliver. You can tell that she's thinking about it and improvising as she goes, and therefore probably telling the truth a lot of the time. Whereas Naomi Watts was just an incredibly calculated Diana, and she almost played, and we'll get into why a little bit later, the kind of vixen, the kind of you can't trust me, I could be anyone. She could have been Renee Zellweger in Chicago, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both. And I think what that says about casting is that we're no longer trying to cast a person who will play up to our wish of what Diana was, a male gaze, a sexy Diana, and also a Diana who was the Diana that women wanted to be and men wanted to be with, like this kind of like salacious Gemini who was like shy but also flirts with the press, versus this Diana that's incredibly uncomfortable and I think probably truer to form, somebody that we can see our own pain in, for better or worse, and somebody that we can empathise with but also be a little bit scared of. Like the kind of very specific pain that Diana went through in her life is hard to be around, and it was a hard film to watch, and maybe that's again what I was thinking about when I watched both. A film about Diana should be hard to watch because her life was hard to live, and I felt like the Diana 2013 film and the way that her character was portrayed made it too easy to watch. It was a rom-com, it was too easy. So, ding ding, first round. I'm afraid 2021 gets it. Next. Narrative choices. What we are presented with that masqueraded as a biopic in the 2013 version was at best a disappointing rom-com. A rom-com of forbidden love where things obviously, this is what I'm talking about with spoilers, don't go to plan, but a rom-com all the same. So this follows Princess Diana 2 or 3 years before she dies, up until the point where she dies. It follows her relationship that was a true relationship with this British Pakistani surgeon. He was a heart surgeon. Poignant, no? Ba-bum, ba-bum. Called Hasnat Khan, who for all accounts, the little we know of him, seems bloody lovely. And they had a relationship that was very, very secret for a very, very long time. I wouldn't say secret, private. And he's a very private person. He's still alive, by the way, and really hates the fact that this film exists, had nothing to do with the royal family, has no press team, has no security, and it doesn't feel like any thoughts or provisions were made for that. And also so little of their relationship is on record that this is purely a work of fiction, and it features, for my sins, cringy allegories about him being a heart surgeon and how hearts really break. Lipstick hearts left on mirrors with kisses next to them. I kid you not. Slow-mo car scenes where they're teasing each other, overlaid with cheesy French restaurant music, and nighttime argument breakup street shouting scenes in which both characters yell lines that no human has ever uttered ever. Not the first to be guilty of any of those crimes, but we find all of that in the 2013 version. And while this is obviously focusing on that aspect of her life, two things that were really weird to leave out, like really weird to leave out. If anybody's read about a paragraph on Wikipedia about Diana, her eating disorder never really gets that much of a look in, and also her children, which we all know from anyone who has known anything about Diana, were like the main part of her life. We see them getting on a helicopter once from the back, I think, but we don't, like, there's no scenes with them. She doesn't talk about them to Hasnat. It's weird. It's a weird choice, and it has to be intentional, and I can't work out the reason for it, apart from the fact to portray her as more of a sexy vixen in a Romeo and Juliet love story. So we've established 2013 definite rom-com status. Spencer, something I was expecting a stiller, more serious drama, especially because this director directed Jackie, but what I actually got was a crime thriller. It felt almost like The Woman in Black or something. There was lots of haunting in it. Some scenes where you definitely thought she was going to stumble across like a dead body or something. And we're left in no doubt that we are tuning in at the end of a tragedy. This is actually set earlier than Diana. It's set in 1991, Christmas 1991, which allegedly were the kind of 2 or 3 days when Diana decided that she was definitely going to leave Charles. Hence the title of the film, Spencer, the maiden name she will be going back to. Let's talk about the two emissions from 2013. So the way that the eating disorder was portrayed in Spencer, I know has been a topic of discussion on the internet, as it always was going to be. For me, I feel when you portray hard things in somebody's life, if a human can go through it, I want to see it on screen. And I obviously want there to be due diligence done so that people who aren't ready to see that don't have to at that time of their lives. In the UK, we have like big warnings on the screen before it comes up for the film, and it tells you exactly what's in it with regards to eating disorders, and it's also like information that's widely available online, so you will know that before you buy a ticket. But I also think, and I don't know where I come down on this, but for me there seems to be equal argument for when you portray an eating disorder and what that looks like. Some people say you're glamorizing it versus not portraying it, because I think when you don't portray it, you don't see the reality reality of it, the like how it really affects that person and how unglamorous it is. So I don't know how I completely fall down in that debate ultimately, but when it comes to this film, I think they did it really, really well. It seems to me like they thought quite hard about the way it was done, and I think just generally all the shots of things there wasn't a shot in this film that you didn't feel like somebody had really thought through. But without me going into too much detail about everything, I think that part of her life was really well portrayed to the point that we can understand her and her specific eating disorder. But I also think it was portrayed in this way that, you know, it was clear that people knew and nobody knew how to help. And I also think it was good because it was portrayed in a way that showed that it wasn't just because she was having a great time and everyone was treating her well, but she was also suffering from an eating disorder. It was shown how intrinsically linked those two things were, and how the eating disorder was more of a symptom of her life and how she was being treated, rather than the cause. The way the royal family like have treated it is that it was the cause of all this trouble, and it was her eating disorder that destroyed the relationship, and she was the problem and creating all this stuff because of this illness. So while it's not like the eating disorder was completely ignored in Diana, it just felt like something that the director just didn't fancy tackling that day. And you know, there's loads of scenes where she was eating beans on toast, and she goes to Chicken Cottage. That's a whole other video. But there were loads of opportunities in the film where food and her relationship to food could have been touched on, and like pointedly wasn't, because like obviously the main focus of that film was her getting the D. The other point was the treatment of the children. So you might not know, but when you're a mother of the royal family, you don't have the same parental rights as you would do otherwise. So like Harry and William, before the age of 18, are property of the crown. Like they're theirs. Diana is an accessory. She is the vessel through which the monarchs are born. But if you separate from a royal member of the family, you don't have like parental rights. She knew, and this is what happened when she separated from Charles, that she would get very limited access to the kids. It ended up being, I think, a weekend every fortnight, which for like a mum who is so invested in being a mum and the kids are still quite young is such a bloody hard choice to make. And without seeing that relationship with her kids, it doesn't make sense. All the other decisions she makes and how long she takes to make them and how she ignores a lot of the kind of really big warning signs can be explained when you know that. But, you know, neither film completely explained that, but I think Spencer showed it a lot more. Obviously, we also get the voices of Harry and William, which is weird because they could watch it. I know that Harry watches The Crown, would literally sell an arm or a leg to find out what he thinks about The Crown. But what we do get are the voices of that next generation of people who are going to be essentially abused, human trafficked through this really weird golden system. And they have these beautiful exchanges about it where they talk like sergeant majors and really get to the root of things. And William asks Diana, do you want to be queen? And she's like, I just want to be your mum. Then she asks William, do you want to be king? And he says, I have no choice, sir. Harrowing. And also we get to see the effects of Diana's mental illness on the boys and how they have to grow up faster to interact with her, and how she tries to protect them from it, but also, you know, doesn't treat them like idiots. Like she does let them in on what's going on. So I'd never seen that portrayed on screen before. And I think it's an important thing for us to see when we're trying to understand how weird the royal family is when it functions, and also Diana herself. I can't believe they included all that, and I can't believe I'd been missing it in every other Diana biopic and stuff that I've watched before. So I thought that was incredible. In fairness, I want to say one thing I thought that was good about the narrative choices in 2013 and one thing I thought was bad about the 2021 version. 2013, amazing scene where Diana goes to Pakistan to try and win over Hasnat's family, and it doesn't go well, and actually his mum ends up giving her a completely impromptu but very sharp lecture on Mountbatten and colonialism in general and how she knows nothing about the legacy of the family that she is in. And it is such a what a scene, so clever. There's a line in it that's just like, what is it? I wrote it down because it was so good. The English always say sorry so beautifully. So loved Mrs. Khan in 2013. And something I kind of didn't like when it came to Spencer was this embodiment of the firm, or like the wishes of the family, the institution, in this one servant who didn't really exist. They made him up to symbolise things, but it's this one guy who follows her around the house and implicitly tells her what to do and scolds her about her duties and stuff. And it just felt a bit formulaic. It didn't make me feel like the pressure was coming in from all sides. sides, because I think what's so scary about the way the royal family sounds like it works, especially from like the Meghan and Harry interviews, is that it's not just one person moving the body. It's not just one person's decision. It's like a agreed set of behaviours that you can't penetrate because they don't have a face. And that's what's scary about it. But while I didn't like that, obviously 2021 is still going to have to win this round as well. Incredible choices. And it's also kind of directed, not just a thriller, it's also kind of directed like a Christmas Carol. Like it has like this element of past, present and future ghosts of things that could happen to her, things that have happened to other people. And it's also kind of unreliable narrator. There's lots of things that she sees happen that it's clear haven't actually happened. So for that reason, it is chilling. But well done to 2021. Let's go to round 3. Relationship to truth. So the 2021 has a phrase at the beginning which I really liked, which was a fable from a true tragedy. Diana doesn't have any such disclaimers, despite being as made up, if not more made up, than the 2021 version. But it also like does like kind of show off a bit about like some of the really small, arguably silly, trivial parts of her life. Like she was really into alternative medicine, had a lot of treatments for that. So there's a really random scene where we see her having that done. We also see her eating beans on toast, which she apparently liked. Small parts were like quite accurate, but overall I felt like the implication was that, you know, a lot of this was true, or could have at least been very true. And they also make more of an effort, obviously they're covering more time I guess, but they make more of an effort to mimic some of those famous scenes, like the one of her at the end of a diving board and that kind of thing. It plays on the visual truths of Diana. And while we see like a few costumes in 2021 that she did wear, why am I such like a Diana nerd? This is such a weird move for me. I didn't mean to. Anyway, we see there's one outfit, I think, in Spencer that is an outfit that she definitely wore during that weekend. But because so much of that weekend happens behind closed doors, there's not such an opportunity to show all the visual things. And there is a flashback surrealist scene where we see her in her wedding dress and other things like that, but generally it doesn't lean on like visual cues to imply that this is the Diana that you know, which I think is a slightly more responsible way to go about making a film about somebody who ultimately can no longer speak for themselves. So I like the fact that there was actually quite a lot that was made up in this, and they obviously go to some surrealist places as well. There was also an insertion of a queer story that I find no record of, but I think that it was significant in distilling a part of Diana's life, that she interacted with the queer community a lot, and that's one of the reasons she got involved with like the AIDS campaigns, was because she lost a lot of friends to it. So the fact that that was in there, it didn't have to be, and I really liked the way it was done. I won't give away too much because I still want you to watch that bit and be surprised, but I really thought that was done well. You can tell me that I'm wrong in the comments, but I liked that insertion that was completely fictional, but I think symbolised something very true about Diana's life. But finally, my favourite thing about Spencer, which I was taken aback by at first, but makes so much sense, was the appearance of Anne Boleyn. I know, I wasn't expecting it either. The ghost of Anne Boleyn walks the corridors around Diana, and she's left a biography on the bed from one of the people from the firm who leaves it as a warning to her. It's called Anne Boleyn, Story of a Martyr, which obviously essentially kind of symbolically Diana turns into. Very dark. But it becomes more interesting when you know that Anne Boleyn, right, she was married to King Henry VIII. Big parallels there because she was accused of adultery, even though it was him that wanted to cheat on her. So he chopped off her head essentially. She was gotten rid of by the royal family to make way for a new queen, Camilla. But even more interesting when you know that Anne's sister also dated Henry. She was his mistress for several years, and Diana's sister dated Prince Charles for like a while. So before both of them got together with the King of England, their sisters dated them and then thought this isn't a good idea. But also Mary, Anne's sister, who dated King Henry, is Diana's 13th great-grandmother. She's related to Anne Boleyn, which tells you more about that circle of people than the accent ever could. Anyway, this feeling of Diana reliving the past and also revisiting her family home during the film gives this sense of that she knew she was in a wash cycle of humanity. She was the next person in a cyclical, circular narrative, and she felt like this was a warning. Like this one weekend, she made the decision to not carry on that legacy and instead move on and ultimately go on to do those incredible interviews we can now watch and find out a little bit about how human beings inside the royal family are treated. Shooketh is what I'd say. Shooketh. So Diana, 2013, gets things like in a good sequence. There's lots of details about how she got out of the palace sometimes that are true. Everything that happens in that order. She wears all the right dresses to all the right occasions. But I think the relationship to truth is slightly skewed. I don't think it really gives us any bigger sense of who Diana was, and ultimately she is putty in the hands of every other character. She doesn't have her own agency. And she acts in this kind of inconsistent way that doesn't give you a through line of how she was actually feeling. However, Spencer, unfaithful to all facts, not all facts, but they're given a very small time frame in which there are no records of it, like really. But I liked the relationship to truth because it was honest about that truth. I think that's again how we've maybe come on when it comes to like the audience being aware of what they're being lied to and what they're being told. And I think the only honest way to make a biopic is to lie. Kind of almost reminded me of I, Tonya, one of my favourite films ever. Really impressed by that film. In this way of like knowing that you can't tell the truth, but trying to find a reality within that. It was really good. So, Spencer, you won again. Yay! The crowd goes wild. So, we have our winner. To be honest, I thought it was going to be a bit of a fairer fight. I watched Diana the week before I watched Spencer, and I was ready to compare them more, but I quickly realised about 30 minutes into the film that this was going to be an easy fight, but it didn't mean that I didn't learn a lot from comparing the two. I think there's something really interesting going on here when we think about what directors want to portray and also what the audience want to see. Since 2013, William and Harry have become much more vocal about mental health concerns within the royal family, and we as a country have become more open about that kind of thing, which made sure that we were able to see the people's princess, the woman that we love, Princess Di, going through something that is incredibly uncomfortable and has many facets to it and can make people act in irrational ways, and we can still honour her. We're not put off by that. Whereas I wonder if that film had been released in 2013, would we as the audience have felt the same? Would we have felt relief to see Diana like that? Or would we have felt a little bit like we'd been cheated? We want our princess. We want our infallible queen. And the reality is the mental health concerns to this day currently are still incredibly inflammatory. Did you know that Princess Diana's therapist was on a retainer to a tabloid for £1,000 a week? And I don't even know if they passed a law to make that illegal yet. Probably not. That allegedly, receipts in the description, Prince Philip tried to blackmail Diana into not divorcing Charles and staying in the marriage by saying that he was going to release tapes of her with other people. Prince Philip! Camilla, who apparently we still pay the wages of, said after Diana's interview that she was loopy, half-witted, and probably ought to be locked up. And when we think about the parallels between that and Anne Boleyn, there's a place where their stories do diverge, and that is that when Anne Boleyn was beheaded, King Henry was able to erase any trace of her. He essentially tried to take her out of the history books. She was chiselled physically out of things, and her place in the family replaced with Jane Seymour. But that, of course, was in a time where most stories were told by men, and they still are to a certain extent, but we are able to keep telling and retelling the story of Diana so she is not erased and ignored by the public the way Anne Boleyn was. In that way, we keep her alive, or at least what her life could maybe teach us. Should her life have to teach us anything for it to have been worthwhile? No. Is this tragedy justified by the UK population getting a really good thwack over the head about how weird the royal institution is? No, absolutely not. But what we do know is that the character of Diana is no longer required to be a woman in a rom-com for us to turn up to the cinema and watch her, and hallelujah for that. Why am I and we maybe so obsessed with her? I don't know. Maybe it's this idea of something that is so tragic but also a little bit glamorous. Everybody loves a thriller with an unreliable heroine with nice hair, but also perhaps because she embodies what everybody thought was an oxymoron. People's princess. People's princess. People's princess. It doesn't make any sense. The more I say it, the more it doesn't make any sense. Because obviously we know, or I know, that the royal family aren't there to serve the people. the people's princess is an oxymoron, but somehow she managed to almost embody it and almost make it true. And perhaps what should ring alarm bells for us is that that was an impossible thing to sustain. The difference between the 2013 Diana and the 2021 film Spencer tells me that we're ready to stop seeing Diana as a lavish character in an incredible rom-com, an untouchable Mother Mary who was there just to save the children. But instead we're ready to hear Diana's story for what it truly was. A horror story. The way we treated her and the way the press treated her and the way the royal family treated her was a horror story. And to tell her story in that way, as this director decided to do, was the kind of truth that really hurts, but maybe we need to hear. That the royal family do not exist for the people, and when they go out and pretend to, they seem to spontaneously combust and destroy themselves. Whereas Diana, somebody who genuinely wanted to talk to people as humans, was so repugnant to the rest of the royal family that she was undeserving of care. Fuck, this got heavy for a film review. I'm sweating. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think about the royal family? I think I'd summarise my thoughts as anti-royalist, pro-royals. I want the human beings inside that system to be protected, and I don't think it's any of their fault directly, but I am against the system that encases them. If you watched Spencer, what do you think? Tell me all the goss. This video was made possible by the Gumption Club, who tip me per video so I can keep making these videos for free for all of you to watch for eternity, probably. There are some more videos I think you might like. Do subscribe if you would like to be here again, and all that's left to say is Frog Snog out.